Lauren Hesterman, for those of you that don't know or haven't seen the page or whatever. Hope you like my cheesy little graphic here. I am a software developer at a little startup in Seattle called Storm Sensor. There's only about 9 of us there right now, and we all have such different roles. I'm the front-end developer. I actually came on as their software developer, but my role kind of evolved over time as we worked on our app. So yeah, once again, let's dive in. I have a question for you guys, in addition to that. Why did you get into coding? Was it that you had like a specific app or website that you wanted to bring to the marketplace someday? Or was it that you wanted a cool job and you heard there was a potential for a competitive salary? Or do you really want to try to change the world? Which I totally think is possible. Well, whatever your reason may be, I think that almost anyone that gets involved with coding will be completely astounded at the possibilities. Unlike so many other skills that you can choose to develop, you have an astronomical amount of free tools at your disposal. I'm sure you recognize almost all of these. All you need really to start is access to a laptop. Not only that, the minute you write your first Hello World application, you become a part of a massive worldwide community, online and offline, many of whom will be ready to help you at the drop of a hat, solve all your questions, all your problems, and answer your questions. So we're all on an equal playing field here in the programming world, and that's why I love it. We all have the ability to create something really cool. So how did I get into programming myself? I'll tell you a little bit about that. It's not the most conventional path. If you've heard of CLU, California Lutheran University, it's about 30 minutes up the road. That's where I got my undergrad degree. I was studying music production and journalism there, actually. Quite the unlikely combination, I know. My mom told me plenty of times. But I graduated about 3 years ago now. Oh my gosh, it's been a while. And I worked in the music business for a little while, and after about a year, I realized it just was not for me. I needed to make a change, had a bit of an internal crisis, one of those good periods of time, and realized that a hobby that I had kind of picked up while I was at college, web development, I took one class in it, and the only reason was that it overlapped in my electives, so I got credits for it. Turned out to be something that I really enjoyed. So I was like, why can't I do this professionally? And I looked into it, didn't want to go back to school, and went to a boot camp. Have any of you guys gone to a coding boot camp? Awesome. Which one did you guys go to? Okay. Okay. Those are all good ones, really good ones. I went to Coding Dojo, if any of you guys have heard of that one. Oh, awesome. Did you go to the, oh, great. I did the one in San Jose, so just a few miles up the road. Wonderful experience, although I'm sure as you guys can understand, quite a lot of work. 4 months, 10 plus hours a day, but it was well worth it. I moved to Seattle a couple months later and started applying to jobs out there and found my little startup that I started working for. And it's been about a year now, so I gotta say I've learned so much in the past year, so much more than I ever thought I would, and I'm really excited to keep learning as I progress in my career. Still really fresh, but we'll all be learning throughout our entire careers. So that's why we're here. So something that I'm sure you guys can all relate to is one of the reasons that we're trying to get into front-end development, or that we enjoy JavaScript, is that it allows for creativity in multiple ways. Firstly, visual. If you find yourself to enjoy like photography or drawing or interior design at all, you really get to exercise your artistic creativity in that way, working in front-end development. And on the flip side, logical creativity. So if you enjoy math or solving puzzles or thinking logically, you'll get to do various algorithms, data transformations, and you'll get to do both kinds of things. And that's why I really love front-end development. But as for Angular itself, what makes it stand out is that it's built to make your applications truly dynamic and powerful. You could totally do similar things with just raw HTML and CSS, but it would take so much more code and so much more of your time. Secondly, it's got much better performance than a very plain HTML, CSS app because of its ability to run asynchronous code and divide up the page into components. That's a very important concept with Angular. Because in the past, we used to think of web pages as the primary divider for your websites, where each page would be comprised of just the elements needed to complete it. But we kind of need to think change our way of thinking now into building by feature instead, or component. Because the real magic of Angular is that you can build each feature as if it was its own mini web page. And then you could piece each of these components together to create the grand view, or user interface. So what's the purpose of that? Why does that help? Why is Angular built that way? Well, mostly so that the components can be reused. You can loop through them, you can inject them into multiple places, and that way you won't have to rewrite them every time you need to use some of this code. For example, a really useful a way I use this quite a lot is with my navigation bar on the site that I've been building at work, and I'll show you that in just a second. If I need to see that navigation bar on almost every single page, I don't have to type out all that code every single time. I can just say, hey, point it to my navigation component, and the same thing will render on each page. And then furthermore, you can update one component at a time rather than the entire site. So the ingenious part of Angular, again, is that you will only have to update the component you need. Save you and your application so much time and bandwidth and having to make fewer HTTP requests to your API or your server, and your site will load faster. So before we go any further, I'm going to pull up a few UI views of the app that I've been building at Storm Sensor and talk through some of these components in the file structure, and you'll be able to see how all of these components interact with each other. So this image here is just a quick screen grab from our website, but I'll tell you a little bit about what the company does. So one of the reasons that we build our app the way we do and decided to use Angular as and have Angular be a tool to our business is that we're a very data-oriented company. The company was created about 3 years ago with the goal of creating smart urban watersheds all over the country. Just like you might have various smart home devices all over that are supposed to aid your life in some way and make things better for you. Our goal is to use our sensor networks to collect as much relevant data as possible about the city's or any city's waterways, stormwater flow, or sewer systems, and run applicable analytics on that data in real time and enable the city, the management, to make really informed decisions about the infrastructure, maintenance, and environmental restoration that they might want to do. Because before now, what happened in the pipes beneath your city was a complete mystery, and millions of dollars were wasted each year on lack of information. So once you have all this data, right, we've been building these sensors, collecting velocity information, depth information about the water, the temperature, a bunch of stuff. So once we have all this data and we've analyzed it, what do you do with it? What's next? That's where the front-end developer, myself, JavaScript and Angular come in. So my goal at the company is to create a user interface that communicates all this data in a very informative and easy way that allows the user to make these informed decisions really quickly. Very important goals of mine are that I want it to be quick. I don't want a user to have to navigate through the site forever to find what they need. I want them to be able to see what they want within hopefully 3 clicks or less. Furthermore, I want to make it easy to read and understand. So I don't want to use any crazy jargon or make things hard to read. I want to display all the necessary data, but not too much of it. And lastly, I want to make it look good. So obviously you want your colors and your color palette to be well organized and thought out, your fonts, your alignments, all that good stuff. And that turns out, as it turns out, is my favorite part. It's very artistic. So this is what, I'll navigate you guys through the site just so you can get a quick understanding of kind of what it looks like. This is our login page. The scoots, those are turtles. The scoots are kind of a brand name for our company, so that's why those are there. But once you log in, if you're an admin, which in this case you would be, you get to choose which customer you interact with. These 3 or 4 lines here are some pilot projects that we have going on right now. And then this is your first landing page. So it's obviously a work in progress, but this is what we have at the moment, and I'll walk you through this real quick. So say you clicked on Aspect Consulting, that is the site at the Port of Seattle site that we work with. We have all of their data organized into what we call sites. So right now they only have one site called Port of Seattle. Each site contains 10 or more, maybe 2 to 20, I guess, monitoring points. And that's how we kind of organize our data into a really clear hierarchy so we understand where the data belongs. So at each monitoring point is a sensor. And then they kind of are built into networks. So they kind of mesh out, I guess. And so once you click on this site, you'll be redirected to our site page where you can get a breakdown of information, peripheral information. We have some weather, precipitation data because that's very important to obviously stormwater flow. You want to know what the precipitation has been. And then your list of monitoring points that I mentioned. So this, if you have 10 of them, you'll have 10 of these table rows here. And each of these will tell you information really quickly in a very concise manner about what's going on at each monitoring point. What are the sensors detecting? Sure.
Do you use D3 for graphs?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yeah, so we use D3. D3 is a graphing framework. For those who may not know, it's really nice, but it's also a little complicated to learn. But we've also been fortunate enough to work with a visual developer who has built a framework on top of D3 called Visually, which is really nice. Visually was used to create this graph here, and it's essentially D3, but it's just a little bit more maintainable. Yeah, so here is just some very detailed information about the site, the breakdown of data within this date range, your status messages, how's it doing, basically the things that are important to your customer. So that's what the site looks like. Let's break down the components. Obviously, most projects start out with your index.html file. That's where you can declare your meta tags, your script tags, anything important to the site. But you're not really going to write any code in there. So furthermore, let's jump into the app component. This is kind of considered your root component. It's going to be nested inside of your index.html file. And this is where you can start to kind of create your DOM or your object model, really, and start to build things inside of it. And furthermore, you can start breaking down your components. So in the little blue box here, that's my navigation component that I mentioned before. The reason why it's its own component is not only so it's reusable, but so that I can make these tabs dynamic very easily. Depending on which page you're on, they will change depending on where you need to navigate to. And right next to this one, the magenta-ish box here is my all sites component, as I call it, or just my sites component. And nested inside of that one is my site summary component. I name it that because it's just the quick detail or quick information about each site. And this is the one that will appear multiple times, depending on how many sites there are. So one step further are my D3 graph components. So I made each of these their own component just because of the complexity of the code. I don't want to pollute one file too much. So these are all parallel to each other inside of the site summary component, which is, once again, so you can see how quickly things can get nested inside of each other and complicated depending on what you're trying to display. Okay, so let's get a little bit more technical. Talk about what the file structure looks like, what your code's going to look like, and how Angular is kind of built, how it works. This, I don't know if you can see this too well, but this is like what your file structure looks like. Some of the important things in file folders to note. One are your node modules. Your node modules are your packages, your dependencies. It's going to be a really long folder, but you have to have those in there generally to make your site function. And inside the source folder, which is right here, that opens up into, I believe, all of this is the meat of your application. And all the way at the bottom, you can see that index.html file. And I believe parallel to that is your root component files. So you have that box inside of the index.html file, that component lives right here. And then the last thing to know is these 4 folders right here, you don't have to have it organized like that, but that's what I've done. All your main components will live inside of here, all parallel to each other for the most part. So, all right. Oh yeah, and once you open up that components folder, you will see each of your components there. Open those up, and you'll see generally 4 files. Each component is generally made up of about 4 files. One, your HTML file. It could look like a typical HTML, whatever you choose to put in there. Here's just a little snippet from one of mine. Obviously your CSS files, so you can style your HTML, and once again, this will only apply to this component. Unless you tell it to, it won't apply to other components. So it's very easy for you to modularize this way. Thirdly, you have a spec file. I won't get into that, but it's essentially a test file, so you can run tests very easily on this component later on. And lastly, your TypeScript file. This is like the function of your component. It's basically JavaScript. I'm assuming most people know a little bit of TypeScript, but it's essentially just a superset of JavaScript with extra syntax and methods. So let's jump into the component file just a little bit. It's a little bit hard to read here, but I'll break it down in just a second. This is typically what it looks like. So at the very top, you have your import statements. This is where you import all of the necessary dependencies, modules, files, variables that you need for this component specifically. This is called dependency injection. And this is a very important concept of Angular that allows it to be so concise and efficient, but still so powerful. You only have to import the things that you need in this file. Just below it, you have these statements here allow you to kind of like declare your component. The first line here, your selector, we'll get to that in a second, but that's kind of what other components will refer to this one as. And just below, you define the file paths for your CSS and your HTML that are generally right next to it. And most importantly, below, you have your main function, or your main class, essentially. So Angular kind of acts as like an object-oriented framework, which will allow you to use each class as somewhat of a blueprint. It's kind of the goal there is to use each component as a blueprint to repeat elsewhere. So things that are crucial to have in each class, as usual, are your attributes and methods. So attributes, you can have multiple variables and things declared inside there, and your methods here in the bottom, and this little pink box here. ng on init, that's something that's a initiation function in each component. And then one I can declare on my own. I could add as many functions and methods as I want. And these attributes will be true, and these methods will run each time this component appears. So how does another tag, or how does another component know that it wants to view this other one? How do you nest them? How do they relate to each other? Well, that's done via the selector tag that I mentioned on the previous page here at the top. So my root component, my app component, I'm going to call it app-root, excuse me. So anytime in any other file, mainly my index.html file, if I want to render this component, all I have to do is type in this tag down here. It's just like a typical HTML tag with your selector at the beginning and the end. So something that's really important to note as well in Angular is the concept of parent-child relationships. If one component is nested inside of another, that inside component is considered to be a child of its parent component. And you can get as deep as you want. And I suppose components next to each other, parallel, are considered siblings, so on and so forth. But this is really important because this allows you to easily pass data from your parent to your child. And it has a lot of other benefits. So for example, if you want to import data from your parent to your child, it'll look a little something like this. So you can recognize the selector tag here, my site summary tag. I want to render that on my sites page. But I want to pass the data into each of these components so I know what to display, because it'll change each time. Each time I render a new site component or a summary component, I want to display a different site. So this will look inside of your parent component and say, hey, what's what's the item. It'll look for that variable, and then it'll pass it down into your site summary component and declare it as a variable called site. And then you could use that information inside of your component however you please. And that allows you to loop through, for example, like this, I have looped through for each site that I have. I looped through this component, say 6 times. Each of these sites is different, and each of these site summary components gets their own site to display. It's such a valuable tool for lots of data. Here's another view, backing up a little bit. You can see how these components here would be considered children of the site summary, also children of the magenta one, which is its parent, so on and so forth. So, yeah, does anyone have any questions that I can answer? Sure.
On your component code a few slides back, there was what are like variables declared? There's like error message and in the yellow box.
Yeah.
All sites an error message. Are those just variables that you're declaring, or like other components?
Yeah. So I declare those as a form of like validation or error handling. This is like, so for example, when I make my request to the API, to the server, and I want to get all of my sites as kind of what this is called, I guess. I handle that data by either saying, if I get real data, do this with it. But if I don't, if I receive an error from the server, I want that to be handled gracefully. So I declare a variable called error message. I apply that error message to the error that I receive from the server. And then I could either look at that myself, or I can display it to the customer, whatever they need, whatever's most valuable.
But they're just variables that declare.
Yeah, and there's, pretty much.
Are any of the methods required by the framework, like Angular? Just constructor, just ng on it?
I don't think so. You have the option to use an after init, so after the DOM has rendered. You can use a method there, but that's not required, and I believe ng on init is the only one that you generally need. I don't even know if you have to use it per se, but I always do. So, yeah.
The slide back, you were talking about passing information from the
Oh.
parent to the child.
Yeah.
So I work primarily with React, and they call it props, right? So I was wondering what you call it and how you access it.
Props?
Yes. So you pass down props from a parent to a child in React.
Like an inherited.
Inherited information. So
Yeah.
List of props and then variable name, and then that's how you access the information that you just put, like where item would be. That's
It might be what I think you might be in terms of, I guess the equivalent might be like an element reference, or that would be to the HTML, but nothing that I use regularly per se.
I'm just wondering how you access that site.
Oh yeah, an input. Yeah, so I don't think I have one on this page here, but essentially if I wanted to import something into this component, if I did the thing on the previous slide, I would declare it as a variable up here. I'd say input as a function. Hey, look into my selector tag. Is there anything it's trying to send me? And then I can declare it as a variable there. Yeah, I think that's what you're talking about. I don't do much with React, but it seems like there's a lot of parallels there. Can I answer any more questions? Cool. Well, I suppose, let me go into this a little bit more. A couple little conclusion points here. It allows you to build some really powerful and dynamic applications. I don't know entirely where the industry is headed in terms of how powerful Angular is going to be in a few years of time, but right now it's either Angular, React, or Vue, but they all seem to be very widely used. I think Angular is more common here in the Bay, or no, in the Bay Area, probably same here in Southern California, and then in Seattle, where I'm from, we use a lot of React, even though I don't use React. Once again, something that's really unique and crucial with Angular is that it increases your responsiveness with that two-way data binding. That's what it's called, one of the things it's called when you pass the data from parent to child. Dependency injection allows you to use the components that you want and only, or the dependencies that you need and only the ones that you need. So it increases your modularity and efficiency. And I didn't really get to this too much, but something that's also worth noting is that you can utilize your service files, or what we call service files, to connect to APIs and servers to make your HTTP requests. And once you get that data, you'll probably need to handle it in some way, process it a little bit. And a lot of times that bulk of code will start to really make your component somewhat messy and a little hard to read. So we modularize even further by connecting to a service file whose sole responsibility is to do that. Cool. Well, I know, yeah.
Was there a reason you guys went with Angular?
Well, it's a funny story because back about a year ago, we were actually we were using a full stack Rails application. So we had, that's what it was, and then we decided to switch once we wanted to scale a little bit more. Rails is a little difficult to do that with. We were going to use a Rails API at first because that's what our backend developer was best at. And then she asked me, and I was allowed to make the decision. She's, what do you want to use? Based off of the fact that I had used Angular for about 3 months at my coding bootcamp, I picked that because I knew it best. So, and luckily it turned out to be one of the best frameworks we could have picked because of how well it handles excess amounts of data and the complication of our website. So I'm really glad I picked it. I probably won't go back for a little while. And luckily we switched to a different API. We're not using just Rails or Rails at all anymore. We're using Java. So they work well together. Yeah. So I know a lot of you guys, some of you guys already use Angular, and probably some of you have it installed. But for those of you that don't, we're going to try to do that a little bit. We're going to try to install the Angular CLI, see if we can get a quick project running. And for those of you that don't want to or that already have it, feel free to ask questions or do whatever you want. We'll see if we can get a quick application going. That'd be awesome. So here's a little cartoon. I'll get to that in a second, but it's just kind of if everyone's creating Hello World applications. Poor world. All right, so I know Angular is a little complicated for those of you that haven't seen it before, but that doesn't mean creating your first app is going to be complicated. It really only takes a few lines on the command prompt or the terminal if you haven't installed it yet. So let's do it. Okay, so the first concept that we got to talk about is the Angular CLI, or command line interface. Unlike several other technologies, you don't actually install Angular on your machine. You install the CLI. And the CLI allows you to create Angular projects, interact with them, interact with your dependencies, create components and services, all from your terminal without having to mess around with the graphic interface too much. But once again, you don't actually install Angular anywhere else except inside your project, really. Okay, so if you guys want to open up your terminal, your command prompt, and we'll follow along. We'll try to do this. Let's see if I can do it with you here. So definitely 2 things to note. You have to have some dependencies, or some prerequisites, excuse me. One of them is Node, and npm, your package manager. You have to have version 8-ish or higher. And if you don't know, you can type node-v, obviously, and same thing with your Node package manager. Make sure you have everything ready to go. And if you guys, once again, have any questions, feel free to ask. I know installing stuff can be quite the frustration. So your first command is going to be npm install -g at Angular/CLI. npm is obviously calling your package manager, telling it to install the Angular CLI and to do it globally. It might take a few minutes, so is it running? Have you guys tried? You got it? Oh, cool. I would totally do that, but I already have it. Anybody having any errors or? Nope. I remember the first time I installed this CLI, I believe there had been some update to it like 15 minutes before I tried to install it, and so there was still a bug, and we searched online all over for it, so we just had to wait for that to be patched. It's kind of funny. All right, so moving on to step 3, you create a new application by running ng new, and then you can name your app whatever you want. Generally your first one, my app. There's a couple other tags that you can add to this line to configure it, to configure out your application a little bit more specifically, but not necessary right now. ng is the call, kind of the Angular's like tag, I guess, that will allow you to queue the CLI basically. So anytime you run that command or a command within the CLI, it'll generally have ng in front of it. Anybody having any issues with that? Yeah?
Yeah, it says Angular 8.0 requires Node version 10.
Oh, does it?
Yeah.
Really? Okay, so it might be that Angular, or the latest version of the CLI requires a newer version of Node. I'm somewhat unaware of that. But if you want to try to update your node or something, we can try to deal with that. Dependencies, and that's always changing, so you never know what you're going to run into. Anybody else having a similar error? What was that?
I have that as well.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Oh.
Is there a way to like lock it to like a version like 1.00 or whatever?
Possibly. Yeah. From my understanding, you generally install as the latest version, but I could be wrong. So there's 2 more quick steps. We'll jump through these quick steps, and then we'll go back and try to fix errors. And you might just have to update your version of Node or whatever before we move on. So step number 4 here is to serve the application. So firstly, you have to navigate inside of it, obviously. So cd, name of your app. Once you're inside of your application, you can type ng serve, and that is essentially, or -- open. The serve command launches your server, watches your files, and then rebuilds the app as you change things, as you modify it. So it'll always be, it's a good development mode kind of thing. It'll always be watching as you're developing on your environment, and your browser will always, if you pointed it to this to the server already, will automatically update and refresh. And the open command will automatically open your browser to localhost 4200. That's the port you're going to be on, generally for Angular.
Do you know what version of Angular you use?
I use 6. Yeah, I believe 7 is the latest, but I usually try to be one step behind the latest one just to make sure there's a bunch of patches. Yeah, I'm sure you guys can understand. I started on 5 and was recently updated, actually. But I know there are some people that are still on Angular, well, JS, really, the original version of Angular, which was, are you? Oh, okay, yeah, that was created a few years ago, and most of the industry has swapped over, but some people are still on it.
Still 1.2.
Oh, man. Good times. Yeah. Yep. So that's important to note. The way you'll be able to tell the difference, and this is crucial to know when you Stack Overflow your Angular questions, is Angular JS with the capital JS at the end is generally going to be the earlier version. And they're quite different, so you'll want to make sure you research the right one. Cool. So once you're hopefully serving your application and you're navigating to port 4200 in the browser, you'll hopefully be able to see this. Has anyone been able to do it? Cool. Seems to be working. What was that? Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah. I'll go to the last slide here, and then we'll walk around and try to fix some errors and stuff. And so lastly, you can make your first edit. So once you open up your IDE, for example, you can go into your app component file, which is inside of your source folder, if you remember. And you can change the name of your application if you want to, for example, under the title variable right there. To anything you want, you can go into the parallel CSS file, add some cool stuff to your title, whatever colors and fonts and stuff. And if you go back to your browser, you'll see the changes hopefully reflected.
Should we say yes, or would you like to add Angular routing?
Oh, yeah, you don't. Yes, I would do that. You don't have to. The routing file is so you can define your URLs basically, but only when you have a bigger application will you need that. Cool. Well, does anybody have any more errors that I can try to help out with? Yeah? Oh, okay. Yeah.
What's your preferred choice for IDE?
I use Visual Studio Code, yeah. That's kind of, I actually don't have much experience with any other IDEs. I've kind of used that one since the beginning. But I don't know. I think it's kind of taking over the industry. There are so many libraries and tools that go along with it now since it's open source. So people are just naturally gravitating towards it and might as well stick with it. I like it.
My fear with Atom is that because it's owned by Microsoft, as Microsoft owns GitHub owns Atom. My fear with Atom is because of that.
I know. Same thing.
Why would they spend money on Atom when they have
Right. So I know you feel like it'll kind of like fall by the wayside a little bit. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm worried about too.
There's something called Codium, which is like an open source version of Visual Code that they remove all the telemetry and all the stuff that Microsoft put in.
Oh, really? Okay, that's fascinating. I'll have to look that up. At this point, there are so many tools you could use to get around whatever you want. It's great. You can really customize your environments. What IDEs do you guys use for the most part? Are you guys all in VS Code? Same? What was that? WebStorm. Oh, okay. I don't actually know that one. Yeah, that's a good one. Should be. And yeah, cool. Well, that's kind of the bulk of, I guess I have that twice, but that's kind of the bulk of what I have to talk to you guys about today. But I'm interested to know what you guys are doing at work. Like, do any of you guys have some cool projects going on right now? Are you working nearby? Anyone? Oh yeah. Okay.
I technically work in marketing, but I work in machine learning.
Oh, okay. Cool. Machine learning is so new and so open-ended. It's got to be a lot of fun. We use a little bit of machine learning at our company, but just because of our mass amounts of data, obviously we want to be able to make inferences from this data and apply it to future cases. But you have to get started somewhere. So cool. Have you guys ever used? I guess for anyone that's on a Mac, I guess most of you are. iTerm or OhmyZSH. Does anybody use that? ZSH, yeah. Just an alternative to your typical terminal. A coworker got me on that the other day, or the other month, and a lot more customization that you can do to your terminal. If you are interested in that kind of thing, it's worth some research. Your commands can be a lot quicker, and you can get a lot more done. So.
ZSH and Terminator. Terminator is it's a way to initialize multiple windows that are really cool, as opposed to just like using tabs.
Oh, really? Yeah, I'd love to.
So if you want to, you can go like that, right? And as opposed to tabs, which I find to be annoying.
Oh, and you could have multiple running like vertically like that?
Yeah, or the other way if you want.
Oh, I like that.
I find it to be just I need to solve all the data at once, as opposed to just I get lost if I have tabs.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier just seeing all the data at once.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. There have been times where I have so many windows open, so many files on tabs. It's just a headache. I have to do some damage control every once in a while and just shut it all down. So, yeah, thank you guys so much for coming out and learning Angular. Hopefully, I know it was pretty introductory. So for those of you that haven't or that already have worked with Angular, you probably have seen it all before, but I really love the framework, and I really think it's a valuable tool for whatever business. Almost anything could utilize it for its potential. So Sure. Yeah, totally.
So do you guys don't use an Angular router?
We have like a routing file, routing module, since if that's what you're, yeah.
And that attempts to emulate what Angular offers with their ng router module, or?
No, you can auto-generate it, but I actually just built mine from scratch.
Okay.
Just so I can have a little bit more custom, but it's essentially the same thing. You just define your routes and inject them throughout your site. Cool, yeah, is there anyone having any more issues, or are you just kind of messing with your new little app? It's a lot of fun. You could try creating a new component. Oh, I should probably say, if you want to create a new component, you can run the command, instead of ng serve or ng new, you can say ng g for generate, c for component, and then you name your component, and then that'll automatically create your component files. So then you could try using that to nest it inside of your app component if you want.
So why not do that, or just like copy and paste a pre-existing component you created? It's just
Because, yeah, so
name for you.
yeah, so I mean, it'll do that. It'll automatically create the files for you, but each component will automatically have its, at least within each other, they will already be injected within another pre-named, so you'd have to go back through, rename your files. Also, in one of your configuration files, I think it's your app.module, it imports those file names and file paths automatically for you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you could technically create a component by hand and just go through and manually add those things, but for speed, that's the only reason.
Is it possible to somewhat inherit from a component that you've already defined that has maybe special functionality, or is it just really generic, create a component?
Yeah, you could. You mean like inheritance-wise? Like, can you?
Or somewhat. So I assume every component has their standard template, but can you modify that template to?
Sure, like the way the file is constructed, kind of. Well, for the most part, I haven't actually experimented with that too much myself. I'm sure you could change the order of things and move stuff around, and there's all sorts of decorators and stuff that you could get fancy with. But you can, for your HTML file especially, you could, if you want, not even have an HTML file, you can just have a quick div tag or something inside your component, or your TypeScript file, where you declare your HTML path, and that's all you need. Yeah, so it's really quick, very like customizable, everything for the most part, and it's a lot of fun. Yeah, any last questions or anything? Cool. Well, I hope you guys all have a lot of fun with your new apps, and hopefully you can become a hobbyist, get into it a little bit more, maybe even get into it as a career someday. That'd be great. All right. Thank you guys very much.